I think there's an interesting thing happening now, because fashion is now freed up from the way that it's had to express itself over the last sort of 60 to 100 years. You know, in the last century was the best way to express fashion, on a magazine. And of course, when the internet came along, it opened up a lot of different possibilities. Department stores like Printemps, who have a footfall of 2.2 million customers a year, and that's the people that come through the door, let alone the people that just walk by and see the windows. Do you have your communication in a magazine that goes out to 10,000 people? Or do you put it in the windows of a department store where it's seen by millions of people? It seems to me that if you can communicate to a large amount of people, it's more exciting. And the department store window seems to be becoming a place where you can put interesting fashion, and it feels a lot more exciting and engaging than seeing it in a glossy magazine. It reminds me a little bit of how I used to look at fashion advertising in print. Some campaigns you really need to show the piece of clothing, you need to show the button and the lapel, because that's an important part of that communication in that season for that designer. Other times you'll be showing something which is more an image-based thing, or something that is a reflection of the nature of that designer or the thought process behind what they're doing. If you understand what I do as communication, then you can communicate in whatever way you choose to. And I kind of broadly see all of art as communication. It's just about an artist wanting to talk about how they feel, life, their reflections on the world and their lives and their desires and everything else. Sometimes you want to whisper very gently in somebody's ear, and sometimes you want to shout. Photography is a fantastic medium, so sculpture, and yes, so is film. It just depends what you're trying to do. I think fashion and film is becoming the main way of articulating fashion. It is why we started SHOWstudio. You have to remember when we first started, there were no mobile video phones, no picture phones. That technology just didn't exist. There was no Facebook, there was none of that. So it's a very, very different world. And there's a lot of the stuff that I wanted to do on SHOWstudio when we first started. The people around me said, oh, you can't, nobody will download a film. And you know, there's a lot of kind of reticence to what I wanted to do, because you know, it just wasn't what we've done. But I think really technology is all there, and it's all waiting for us to kind of just use it and move on with it. I think that the fashion film as a genre is being invented, and there are very, very, very few people who are getting it right. There always have been in fashion photography, only a very, very few people that got that medium right. When fashion photography first started, which is around 1910, with Edward Steichen and Baron Alec May, they kind of were the main fashion photographers, or the only fashion photographers really working for 10, 15 years. And then you got other people that came along, you know, Munkaski, people like that. Fashion photography didn't become the genre that you recognise as fashion photography till right into the 60s. That's 50 years. You know, fashion film's been going 10 years, if that. You know, let's see where it is in 50 years' time. It took Penn and Bailey and Avden and Newton and Bourdin to make it into what you and I understand as fashion photography. You know, prior to 1960, it was I think Avden described it as, it was a trade like being a plumber. It wasn't, you know, didn't want to be a kind of, you know, rock and roll star or a fashion photographer, you know, it was, you know, it wasn't that. I think it's all exciting. There is a huge change going on, and I'm thrilled to be living through it into a much deeper revolution than perhaps we first thought it would be. It's a much more fundamental change in how we communicate as a species. The fashion shows are now broadcast live, or are getting to that point. Then people see the clothes. The first time you see Gareth Pugh's clothing is one of Ruth Hogburn's films, and it goes out live at the same time as his show. So you start your desire for that piece of clothing at that point. So, you know, that speeds up how then something like Gareth has to produce that piece of clothing. That speeds up that whole cycle.